Hi, I'm Thom Ruhe of the Kauffman Foundation. Welcome to this edition of Top of Mind, where today we're taking on the F word of entrepreneurship, failure. I'll be joined by entrepreneur Diana Kander, who's publishing a series of articles on the subject on entrepreneurship.org. I'm Thom Ruhe of the Kauffman Foundation, and I'm here today for this episode of Top of Mind with entrepreneur, attorney, and entrepreneur in residence of Kauffman Labs, Diana Kander. Diana, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So as we said at kind of the intro, I referred to this as the failure edition of Top of Mind. In the time that you and I have known each other and based upon both of our backgrounds in entrepreneurship, you know, failure and what that means to the entrepreneurial journey and how that affects an entrepreneur has been something that's, well, if you'll excuse me for saying it, top of both of our minds. So I really wanted to have you on today so that you can share with me your thoughts and thinking and experience on that. And maybe we should start, though, getting a little bit of background about you.
Sure. So I've very experienced with failure in my own entrepreneurial journey. I have raised large amounts of angel money to start startups that failed. I have run successful companies that try to have spin-off products that didn't find a market. So failure has been a regular part of my entrepreneurial journey, but responsible for a lot of both the ups and downs.
You know, one of the things that I've always been impressed with you, first of all, the confidence that you have and the ease with which you can disclose that, you know, and that's not common amongst, you know, entrepreneurs. I find that more characteristic of, you know, entrepreneurs that have been there multiple times.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've, you know, experienced some stigma in the past. You know, how have you dealt with that? You know,
Sure.
And how is it that you're so confident and comfortable with that right now?
So failure is very taboo in the entrepreneurship space, which is very ironic because most people think it's very welcome and it's a regular part of being in a startup and being an entrepreneur. But if you think about the media coverage that we receive in the entrepreneurship community, most news stories cover one of three topics: when a company first launches, when it raises money, or when it sells. So that's the vast majority, like 95% of all articles are about those things. And the truth is, over 95% of those startups are going to fail. And almost none of that failure is covered. So we're just used to reading about nothing but that kind of life cycle. Most people think everybody's life cycle is to start, get funded, and then sell. And that's just not the average story. So I actually wanted to tell the other part of that story. And so we started a series of failure interviews. So finding entrepreneurs who had met a lot of the criteria of those news articles, started huge companies, raised lots of money, and then just failed, just in a very classic way. And they didn't have just setbacks that they overcame to reach success. They just failed, and they tried a lot of things, but they couldn't make it work. And those are the stories that I want to share with entrepreneurs, just to let them know that it's totally normal, and maybe they can use failures from others to avoid their mistakes.
You know, that really seems like the lost opportunity, right? That we can't extract something from those experiences to share with others. So obviously I share your opinion on that, which is why we're enthusiastically supporting this series and trying to share that and make failure, you know, I don't know to the extent we can, but less of a stigma to it.
Sure.
I know there are pockets too that, you know, actually not having failure would carry a little bit of a suspicion because it means perhaps you haven't tried enough yet, or you haven't applied yourself out there enough yet. I wonder if you may or if you have observed a nuanced difference in the way failure is handled by men versus women.
Sure, absolutely. So it's very interesting. Our interviews have been pretty equally divided between men and women, even though men make up a majority of startup founders. And it seems like women take failure very personally, and they attribute successes to outside forces like luck or advice from others, and men are the exact opposite. Men attribute failure to outside forces, like it was totally beyond my control, I did everything correctly, and they internalize all successes. So whenever they do have successes, it's because of things that they specifically, steps that they took. So it's actually very interesting to see the differences between the two sexes.
That is interesting. It seems almost like probably the better model might be the hybrid of the two,
right?
A little bit of attribution on both ends of those extremes. You know, I have to say I'm actually not flattered to hear you characterize how males deal with failure, but I don't know that I would quarrel with you on that. I think you're quite right, myself included in my own entrepreneurial journey. So, you know, in your interviews, have you noticed any like big common themes or, you know, repeats, you know, in the failures that are being observed?
So the major one is that cash is king. So you need to conserve your cash as long as possible to be able to make mistakes. So the vast majority of companies that went out of business just ran out of money when they started figuring out what they were doing.
Oh, really? At that critical point?
Right, and that's because they started spending money before they were ready. And so that leads to the next critical point that almost every one of the interviews we've done has in common, which is you need to test your business model as early as possible. So most people think that they get an idea and they go out and raise money and then they execute on their idea. But really what you're going to end up doing is spending that angel money, kind of figuring out where your business model is. The more work you can do up front without spending any money,
sure,
interviewing customers, talking to vendors or suppliers, the further you are, the less likely you're going to be to fail.
You know, and we have, of course, touched on that in other publications and things that we've supported. You know, I think you're alluding to things like driving for that minimally viable product,
sure,
and things that let you get out on the market. You know, I would have to say, just from my own experience in coaching entrepreneurs, it does seem to be a problem. You know, especially, it's been my observation, people with technology backgrounds, right? Boy, they want to tweak, and get it absolutely perfect before they go have their very first experience with a client.
Yeah.
And it seems like you lose a lot of time and probably spend a lot of money. So that said,
well, I would just add, I think that one of the positive things we've seen from the interviews is that they learn very quickly. So once somebody has a colossal failure where they blow through $3 million trying to start a startup that is unsuccessful, the next startup, they are a lot more cautious. And maybe that's why VCs love to work with people who have failed in the past or have experiences, but they're just a lot more careful with trying to lay the groundwork for their business model, and they understand what the cash is for.
In your discussions and interviews in this case, was there any percentage that became obvious to you that failure was like their stopping point for their entrepreneurial journey? You know, they hit it and they said, at that point, no, entrepreneurship's not for me.
Yeah, I think the more amount of money that they seem to have spent, the longer it took to bounce back. So maybe it's like the numbers in divorce. You know, for every year you're married, it takes, you know, a certain number of months to get over it. And I think the same is true for entrepreneurs. So the more money you spend, the longer it takes for you to kind of get over it and move on to your next venture.
So, reflecting on, you know, what you learned through these and your own rich background, I mean, I don't think we've shared really much of any of your own journeys and deals that you've done.
Sure.
You've impressed me. I mean, you really do. You have a great resume for as young as you are in this regard. So how do you think entrepreneurs should deal with failure? You know, like what relationship or, you know, pact should they make with failure?
Yeah, the best analogy I've been able to come up with is for entrepreneurs to think of themselves as poker players. So poker players who play in tournaments are guaranteed to lose hands. It's impossible for you to be a professional poker player and not lose a hand. In fact, you're going to lose the vast majority of your hands. But as long as you have cash at the end of the day, as long as you have more winnings than you do losses, then you're a very successful professional poker player.
You're still in the game, so to speak.
That's right. And so that's how entrepreneurs should look at it. That means, number one, they should try to limit the bet the company gambles that they're making. So they should allow themselves to have enough cash in order to take risks and bets, but that they're not risking all of their money at once. So if you're
Not
playing
all in.
Yeah, if you're playing poker, you don't want to go all in on every hand. You want to be careful minimizing your losses. And it also means that you try to save money and you gamble with what you can afford to lose. And so the entrepreneurs that I've seen that are careful about the resources that they're using, those are the ones that learned a lot from the failures that they've had, but have gone on to achieve great success.
So, we're talking a lot about failure here, and another area of interest for the foundation is, ecosystems and community building around entrepreneurship and having community buy-in in this activity. What, if any, advice do you have on the community level to control a narrative or to maybe seed a narrative around failure?
Sure.
And how that might help in building these ecosystems?
Well, as I said, failure is still a very taboo subject in entrepreneurship. It shouldn't be, but it is. Most of community events are about beginnings, and I can't think of very many that are about helping entrepreneurs deal with difficult situations. And it's just not a very accepted practice right now for entrepreneurs to say anything but, oh, my startup is going fantastic and I'm getting customers left and right and we're hitting all our traction points, because you're constantly selling to potential investors or potential customers. And so there's a ton of pressure for entrepreneurs to have just nothing but positive things to say, but they're not going to get the help that they need. They're just going to spin into a series of mistakes without having actual valuable input.
I think I'm going to have to credit you now for an idea. It might be a terrible idea. We'll see, and we'll let the viewers of Top of Mind chime in on this, but perhaps, something that we can put out there in the community, entrepreneurial community waters, so to speak, is, I don't know, why don't you possibly hold a wake?
Right.
Like maybe have an annual wake for the entrepreneurial community where, those who have tried and failed can come and share and be heard and share the experience so that others can benefit from it. I mean, like I said, that could be a terrible idea, but it seems that you're right on that. It seems that the creation, the launch points, the finance points, these are the things that we pay attention to.
Right.
And we're missing a great opportunity to learn.
No, absolutely. And to help entrepreneurs before they make the really big all-in mistakes. And I think that's a great idea. It's part of what I'm trying to accomplish with this failure interview series. It's actually a lot harder than you think to get people to talk about
I'm sure.
These failures. They're very personal. And my goal is that the more examples we can show of people willing to talk about their failures, the more comfortable people are going to become about telling others when they're in trouble and reaching out for help and getting help and possibly saving their companies before it's too late.
Mitigating those failures.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for joining me on Top of Mind today, and I have a feeling we're going to be revisiting this topic, and if we ever do get to that point to launch that good or bad idea of a wake, hopefully maybe we can, share lessons on how to do that. So thanks for sharing your story today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.